Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Speak Smart podcast. Today, we're taking a deep dive into a method you're interested in for improving your English. Pairing audiobooks with reading.
Okay.
I have to say, the material you sent over is spot on. It's actually from another podcast that talks about this exact approach.
Oh, wow.
What are the chances, right?
Yeah. So you're clearly onto something that a lot of language learners are curious about. Now, you've specifically mentioned wanting to improve your English, and this method can be a game changer, whether it's for personal goals, professional reasons,
Right.
or just the sheer fun of expanding your skills.
I think that's a great point.
Yeah.
What's really interesting here is the science behind why this works. By combining listening and reading, you're essentially creating a multi-sensory experience for your brain.
Yeah.
It's not just about hearing the pronunciation. It's about connecting that sound to the written form of the word.
I see.
Think of it like building a bridge between your ears and your eyes and making the learning process much more powerful. So we've got the why.
Mm-hmm.
This pairing method really taps into how our brains learn best.
Yeah.
But the source material also emphasizes the importance of choosing the right books and audiobooks. It's not just a random grab bag approach, is it?
Absolutely not. One of the key takeaways here is that your materials need to match your current English level if you're a beginner. Diving headfirst into a complex novel is probably going to lead to frustration.
Right.
The source materials suggest starting with something simpler, like children's books or graded readers, which are specifically designed for language learners.
That makes a lot of sense. You wouldn't expect someone learning to ride a bike to start on a mountain trail, right? You start with something more manageable.
Yeah,
Build those foundational skills.
exactly.
What about someone who's, say, at an intermediate level?
That's where things get really fun. You can explore short novels, maybe in genres you already enjoy. Think mysteries, thrillers, or even romance novels. The key is to find something that genuinely interests you. Something you want to read, even if you weren't trying to learn English.
Because let's face it, if you're bored, you're not going to stick with it.
Exactly.
Speaking of sticking with it, the source material actually highlights some specific books as great examples for this method. They mentioned The Little Prince, which is a classic and often recommended for language learners because of its simple yet profound language.
The Little Prince is a fantastic choice. The story itself is captivating, and the language is beautiful without being overly complex. And there are tons of excellent audiobook versions available, so you can really immerse yourself in the story.
They also suggested Charlotte's Web, which brings back so many fun childhood memories for me. I imagine that kind of heartwarming story could be really motivating for a learner, especially if they already have positive associations with it.
Absolutely. Nostalgia can be a powerful motivator. And from a language learning perspective, Charlotte's Web offers a rich vocabulary without being overwhelming. Plus, the audiobook version, narrated by E.B. White himself, is a true gem.
Wow. Okay, so we've got some great options for beginners and even those dipping their toes into intermediate level material. But the source material also had suggestions for people who are a bit more advanced, right?
Yes, they mentioned a couple of really engaging books, Harry Potter and The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime.
Harry Potter's a no-brainer, right? The books are global phenomena, and the audiobooks are incredibly well produced. It's like stepping right into that magical world.
Yeah.
But The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime is an interesting choice. The language is a bit more unique, isn't it?
It is. It's told from the perspective of a teenager with autism. So the language is very direct and literal. It might be a bit challenging,
Yeah.
but it's also incredibly rewarding because it exposes you to a different style of writing and storytelling. And the audiobook version is brilliantly narrated, which can really enhance the learning experience.
Now, we've got a nice range of options here, from classics to more contemporary novels, but choosing the book is only half the battle, right?
Yeah.
The source material also stresses the importance of selecting the right audiobook. What should our listeners be looking for?
A clear narrator is crucial. You want someone whose voice is easy to understand and engaging to listen to.
Right. The last thing you want is a narrator who mumbles or rushes through the text.
No, definitely not.
And the other key point the source material makes is to make sure the audiobook version matches the text you're reading. Seems obvious, but you wouldn't believe how many different editions of some books are out there.
It happens more often than you'd think, and it can be incredibly frustrating if the narrator is skipping over paragraphs or using slightly different wording. So double check that your audiobook and text are perfectly aligned.
They even suggest listening to samples first, kind of like test driving a car before you buy it.
That's a great analogy. Most audiobook platforms offer samples, so take advantage of that. Listen for a few minutes
Yeah.
and see if the narrator's voice, pace, and overall style work for you.
So we've covered choosing the right materials, both the book itself and the audiobook. And one of the things that really stood out to me in the source material was the emphasis on active engagement. It's not enough to just passively listen while you're doing the dishes or driving to work, is it?
Definitely not. If you want to really maximize your learning, you need to be actively involved with the material.
So what does that look like in practice? What are some specific techniques that our listeners can use?
Well, for starters, don't just let the words wash over you. Pause the audiobook every now and then and ask yourself questions about the story.
Okay, what just happened? Why did that character do that? What do you think will happen next?
It's like turning it into a game, right? Trying to predict the plot twists and surprises.
Exactly. And another great technique is to summarize sections in your own words. Can you explain what happened in the last chapter without looking back at the text? This helps you test your comprehension and make sure you're really absorbing the information.
It forces you to engage with the material on a deeper level, rather than just passively listening.
Any other techniques our listeners should try?
Another powerful one is shadowing. This involves listening to a short section of the audiobook and then trying to imitate the narrator as closely as possible.
Okay. Matching their pronunciation,
Yeah.
intonation, and even their pauses.
It sounds a bit intimidating, but with practice, it becomes more natural. And it's an incredibly effective way to fine-tune your pronunciation and develop a more native-like accent.
So we've got pausing to ask questions,
Mm-hmm.
summarizing sections, and shadowing. Any other active engagement tips before we move on?
One more that can be really helpful is to make note of any unfamiliar words or phrases. Don't just gloss over them, write them down, look up their definitions, and try to use them in your own sentences.
It's all about building that vocabulary, right?
Yeah.
And making those new words part of your active repertoire. The more you use them, the more likely they are to stick in your memory. This is all such great advice. I can already see how pairing audiobooks with reading and then actively engaging with the material can create a truly immersive and effective learning experience. But let's be real. Learning a language takes time and effort. There are going to be moments when our listeners feel frustrated or discouraged. What does the source material say about staying motivated on this journey?
That's such an important point. Motivation is key. And the source material offers some really practical advice on this. One of the simplest but most powerful tips is to regularly remind yourself why you're learning English.
Okay. What are your goals? What do you hope to achieve?
It's like connecting back to your why, right?
Yeah.
That deeper purpose that's driving you forward.
Exactly. And the other key tip they offer is to break down your goals into smaller, more manageable steps. Instead of focusing on fluency as this big, overwhelming goal, try setting smaller milestones. Maybe it's finishing a chapter a day or learning 10 new words each week.
So it's about creating a sense of achievable progress, right? Those small wins that keep you motivated along the way.
Absolutely. And don't underestimate the power of celebrating those wins. Treat yourself to something you enjoy,
Yeah.
whether it's a cup of coffee, a movie night, or anything that makes you feel good. You deserve it.
It's like rewarding yourself for all that hard work,
Yeah.
right? Making the process a bit more enjoyable.
What about the social aspect of learning? The source material touches on that as well, doesn't it?
It does, and it's a really important point. Connecting with other learners can make a huge difference in your motivation and overall success.
They talked about finding a study buddy,
Uh,
a language exchange partner,
mm,
or even joining an online community. It's about finding your tribe, right?
yeah.
People who understand the challenges and can offer support and encouragement.
It's-
sharing your experiences, practicing together, and celebrating each other's successes can make the learning process so much more enjoyable and rewarding.
This is all such great advice. I feel like we've really unpacked the essence of this method. But before we wrap up this part of the deep dive, there's one thing I'm curious about. The source material talks about the importance of choosing materials that match your English level. But how do you actually figure out what your level is? Is there a test you can take?
That's a great question, and it's something a lot of learners struggle with. Luckily, there are a few ways to assess your level. One option is to take a placement test. Many language learning websites and apps offer these for free.
So it's like taking a quiz to see where you stand.
Exactly. These tests typically cover reading, listening, grammar, and vocabulary, giving you a good overall picture of your strengths and weaknesses.
That sounds helpful. But what if you don't want to take a formal test? Are there other ways to get a sense of your level? Absolutely. Another approach is to simply try reading or listening to different materials and see how you feel. If you're struggling to understand more than a few words in a sentence, the material might be too advanced. On the other hand, if you're flying through a book without any effort, you might be ready for something more challenging.
So it's all about finding that sweet spot, that Goldilocks zone,
Yeah.
where the material is challenging enough to keep you engaged,
Yeah.
but not so difficult that you feel completely lost.
Exactly. And remember, your level isn't static. It will change as you progress. And don't forget, your reading level might be different from your listening level
Yeah.
or your speaking level. They all develop at their own pace.
That makes a lot of sense. It's not like you're permanently stuck at a certain level. It's a dynamic process. And it's important to be patient with yourself. Well, this has been an incredibly insightful discussion so far. We've covered a lot of ground, choosing the right materials, active engagement techniques, staying motivated, and even figuring out your English level. But there's so much more to explore. We'll be right back after a short break to delve even deeper into the fascinating world of learning English with audiobooks and reading. Welcome back to Speak Smart. We're in the midst of our deep dive into learning English by pairing audiobooks with reading. And before the break, we were talking about assessing your English level,
Right.
which is a great segue into something I've been thinking about. The source material focuses on combining audiobooks with reading. But is there any benefit to just listening to audiobooks on their own?
That's a great question, and the answer is a resounding yes. In fact, listening to audiobooks without the text can be a fantastic way to improve your listening comprehension, which is a crucial skill for any language learner.
So it's kind of like passive immersion, right?
Exactly.
They're surrounded by the language, even if you're not actively studying a textbook.
Think of it as training your ears to become more attuned to the sounds and rhythms of English. It's like going to the gym for your listening muscles.
Okay.
And the beauty of audiobooks is that you can listen to them anywhere, anytime. While commuting,
Yeah.
exercising, doing chores. It's like sneaking in extra practice without even trying.
I love that. It's like multitasking for language learning. But I imagine it can be challenging to stay focused,
Yeah.
especially if you're not following along with the text. Any tips for making the most of audiobook-only listening?
Absolutely. One key strategy is to choose audiobooks that genuinely captivate your interest. If you're hooked on the story, you're more likely to pay attention to the language. Think about genres you enjoy: mysteries, thrillers, biographies, even self-help books.
Right. Goes back to that idea of making learning enjoyable.
Exactly.
If you're bored, your mind is more likely to wander,
Yeah.
and you won't retain as much.
And don't be afraid to experiment with different narrators. Some people prefer voices that are soothing and calming, while others prefer more energetic and dynamic styles. Find what works best for you.
So it's like finding the right radio DJ for your language learning journey.
Yeah.
And speaking of adjusting the experience, what about listening speed? Does that come into play?
Definitely. If you're finding it tough to keep up with the narrator,
Yeah.
don't hesitate to slow down the playback speed.
Okay.
Most audiobook apps have this feature, so play around with it until you find a comfortable pace. There's no shame in starting slowly and gradually increasing the speed as your listening skills improve.
That's such good advice. It's like adjusting the weights at the gym.
Yeah.
You don't want to start with something too heavy and risk injuring yourself.
Right.
And what about note-taking? Is that something you recommend for audiobook-only listening?
It depends on your goals. If you're purely focused on improving your listening comprehension, note-taking might not be necessary. But if you're trying to expand your vocabulary or focus on specific grammar points, jotting down unfamiliar words or phrases can be helpful.
So it's about tailoring your approach to what you want to achieve. If you're super focused on vocabulary building, those notes might be your best friend.
Exactly.
And remember, you don't have to catch every single word. Focus on getting the gist of what's being said. You can always rewind and replay sections if you need to.
That's a good point.
This is all so helpful. I feel like I'm starting to get the hang of this audiobook-only approach. But let's circle back to the idea of pairing audiobooks with reading.
Yeah.
We talked about active engagement earlier, but I'd love to dig a little deeper into that. What does that actually look like in practice?
Active engagement is all about taking a proactive role in your learning. Rather than just passively absorbing information, it's about interacting with the material, asking questions, and making connections.
So it's not just about sitting back
Yeah.
and letting the story wash over you. It's about becoming an active participant in the learning process. For example, before you even start a chapter, take a moment to look at the title and any illustrations. What do you think this chapter will be about? What kind of vocabulary do you expect to encounter? This helps you activate your prior knowledge and sets the stage for more effective learning.
It's like giving your brain a little warm-up before the main event.
Okay.
And once you start reading and listening, what are some specific techniques you recommend?
One powerful technique is prediction. As you're reading and listening, try to anticipate what's going to happen next. What will the character do? What will they say? This encourages you to think critically about the story and the language being used.
It's like turning it into a game, right? Trying to outsmart the author
Why?
and guess the next plot twist.
Exactly.
And when you come across an unfamiliar word or phrase, don't just rush to look it up in the dictionary. First, try to guess its meaning from the context.
It's like becoming a language detective, piecing together clues to crack the code. This helps you develop your inferencing skills, which is crucial for reading comprehension. And once you've made your guess, then you can check the dictionary to see if you were right.
So it's about training yourself to think critically about the language, rather than just relying on a dictionary as a crutch.
Exactly.
Another helpful technique is to visualize what you're reading and listening to. Create mental images of the characters, the setting, the action. This can make the story come alive and help you remember the details more vividly.
It's like creating your own movie in your mind,
Precisely.
engaging your imagination to enhance the learning experience.
And don't be afraid to pause the audiobook and reread sections that you find particularly challenging or interesting. Take your time to really savor the language, appreciate the nuances of the author's style, and make sure you understand everything that's happening.
It's about quality over quantity, right?
Exactly.
It's better to read and listen carefully to a few pages than to skim through an entire chapter without really absorbing anything.
And if you're learning with a partner or a study group, take advantage of that social interaction. Discuss the book. Ask each other questions and share your thoughts and reactions.
It's like creating your own little book club,
But
but with the added benefit of practicing English.
absolutely.
And even if you're learning on your own,
Yeah.
you can still engage in a form of discussion
Yeah.
by writing down your thoughts and reactions in a journal or even recording a voice memo.
So it's all about finding ways to interact with the material and make it come alive, whether you're learning with others or on your own.
Exactly.
The more actively engaged you are, the more you'll get out of the learning experience. Now, one specific technique that the source material highlights is the power of repetition.
Okay.
They talk about rereading sections multiple times, listening to chapters more than once, and really drilling down into the language.
I can see how that would be helpful, especially for those tricky sections that just won't seem to stick in your brain. Repetition helps to reinforce those neural connections we were talking about earlier. It's like building a stronger bridge between the sound of the word, its written form, and its meaning.
It's like practicing a musical instrument or a sport. The more you repeat those movements, the smoother and more effortless they become.
Absolutely.
And remember, repetition doesn't have to be boring. You can make it more engaging by trying different techniques. For example, one time you might listen to a chapter without looking at the text, focusing purely on your listening comprehension. The next time, you might read and listen simultaneously, paying close attention to the pronunciation and intonation. And the third time, you might try shadowing the narrator, mimicking their every word and inflection.
That's a great idea. It keeps the material fresh.
Yeah.
Challenges you to use different skills each time.
Exactly.
And don't underestimate the power of spaced repetition. This involves revisiting material at increasing intervals. For example, reviewing a chapter after one day, then 3 days, then a week, then a month. This helps to solidify the information in your long-term memory.
It's like giving your brain little reminders along the way, helping those new words and phrases really sink in.
Precisely.
And there are actually apps and software programs designed specifically for spaced repetition, which can be a really helpful tool.
That's great to know. So we've talked about choosing the right books and audiobooks, engaging actively with the material, staying motivated, and even using repetition to enhance learning. Is there anything else our listeners should keep in mind as they embark on this language learning journey?
One final thought I'd like to leave our listeners with is the importance of patience and self-compassion. Learning a language takes time and effort. There will be days when you feel like you're making great strides and days when you feel stuck. It's all part of the process.
That's running a marathon, right?
Exactly.
There will be hills and valleys along the way, but the key is to keep moving forward, one step at a time.
Celebrate your successes. Learn from your mistakes. And most importantly, enjoy the journey. Learning English should be a rewarding and enriching experience.
That's such a great reminder. It's not just about reaching the destination. It's about enjoying the ride along the way.
Well, this has been an incredibly insightful conversation, and I feel like we've really covered the ins and outs of learning English with audiobooks and reading. But unfortunately, we're out of time for this part of the deep dive. We'll be right back after a short break to wrap things up and leave you with some final thoughts and resources. Welcome back to Speak Smart. We've been on quite a journey today, exploring the ins and outs of learning English with audiobooks and reading.
It has been a journey.
And before the break, we were talking about the importance of patience and self-compassion on this language learning adventure.
Absolutely. Those are essential ingredients for success. It's so easy to get caught up in comparing ourselves to others or feeling frustrated when progress feels slow.
Right.
But remember, everyone learns at their own pace.
Yeah.
And the journey itself is just as important as the destination.
It's like that saying, enjoy the journey, not just the destination.
It's a cliche, but it's so true,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to learning something new. And speaking of enjoying the journey, the source material really emphasizes the importance of finding ways to make language learning fun and engaging.
Definitely. It shouldn't feel like a chore. If you're dreading your study sessions, you're less likely to stick with them.
Right.
The source material suggests incorporating activities you genuinely enjoy into your routine. Things like watching movies, listening to music, or even playing video games in English.
It's all about finding ways to immerse yourself in the language naturally, right? So
Exactly.
it becomes a part of your daily life rather than something you just do for an hour in the evening.
And remember, those activities shouldn't feel like work. They should be things you look forward to, things that bring you joy. The more you enjoy the process, the more motivated you'll be to continue.
I love that. It takes the pressure off, right?
Yeah.
It's not about being perfect. It's
Yeah.
about having fun and exploring the language in a way that feels authentic to you. And speaking of exploring, don't be afraid to experiment with different learning resources. There are so many amazing tools available these days, from apps and websites to podcasts and online communities. The source material specifically mentions libraries as a great resource.
Libraries are wonderful.
Yes, libraries are a treasure trove of language learning materials. Not only do they have a vast selection of books and audiobooks, but they often offer free classes, workshops, and conversation groups.
Exactly.
And many libraries now have digital collections as well, so you can access audiobooks and ebooks from the comfort of your own home. It's like having an entire language learning center at your fingertips.
That's a great way to put it.
It's incredible. And speaking of digital resources, the source material also mentions Audible as a popular platform for finding audiobooks. What other online resources would you recommend for our listeners?
There are so many great ones. Some of my personal favorites include Duolingo, Babbel, and Memrise. These apps offer interactive lessons, gamify activities, and personalized learning plans, making the learning process more engaging and effective.
They're like having a language tutor in your pocket.
Yeah.
And I've heard great things about HelloTalk, which connects you with native speakers for language exchange.
Yes, HelloTalk is a fantastic way to practice your speaking and writing skills in a real-world setting. You can chat with people from all over the world, learn about different cultures, and get feedback on your language skills.
It's like having a global pen pal, but with the added benefit of instant communication.
Right?
And speaking of real-world practice, the source material talks about the importance of finding opportunities to use English outside of structured study time.
That's such a crucial point. The more you use the language in authentic situations, the more confident and fluent you'll become. Look for opportunities to interact with English speakers in your community, even if it's just ordering a coffee or asking for directions.
It's about stepping outside your comfort zone
It is.
and embracing those little moments of real-world practice.
Exactly.
And remember, mistakes are part of the learning process. Don't be afraid to make them. The more you practice,
Yeah.
the better you'll get.
It's about focusing on progress, not perfection.
Exactly. And speaking of progress, one of the things that stood out to me in the source material was the emphasis on tracking your learning journey. Talk about keeping a journal, noting down new words and phrases,
Yeah.
and reflecting on your successes and challenges.
Journaling can be an incredibly powerful tool for language learning. It helps you to identify patterns in your learning, track your progress, and stay motivated.
Okay.
And it's a great way to process your thoughts and emotions. about the learning process.
It's like having a conversation with yourself about your language learning journey, a way to reflect on what's working, what's challenging, and what you want to focus on in the future.
Exactly.
And don't be afraid to get creative with your journaling. You can write in English,
Yeah.
translate phrases, or even draw pictures to represent new vocabulary words. It's all about finding what works best for you.
That's such a great reminder. There's no right or wrong way to learn a language.
Yeah.
The key is to find what resonates with you and makes the process enjoyable. And remember, language learning is a lifelong journey. It's not something you finish in a few weeks or months. It's about continually expanding your knowledge, refining your skills, and embracing the beauty and richness of the English language.
That's such a beautiful way to put it. It's about opening yourself up to new ways of thinking, communicating, and connecting with the world around you.
Exactly.
And the rewards are immeasurable.
They are.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive into the world of learning English with audiobooks and reading. I feel like we've covered everything from choosing the right materials and engaging actively to staying motivated and embracing the journey.
I think we did a good job.
Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap things up?
Just one final thought. Remember, learning a language is a gift you give yourself. It's an investment in your personal and professional growth. So embrace the challenge, enjoy the process, and never stop learning.
What a wonderful note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us today on Speak Smart. We hope you found this deep dive helpful and inspiring. Remember to subscribe to our channel, like this episode, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on future episodes.
And we'll see all of you again soon.
Until next time, happy learning.